Hi friends. I invite you all to listen to a brand new story.
For 2 days instinct carried her. Hunger gnawed, exhaustion blurred her vision, but the will to keep the pup alive pressed her forward. She crossed ridges, creeks, valleys smothered in snow, driven by nothing but love and desperation. That morning she stepped onto a frozen creek. The snow muffled her paws, but the ice betrayed her. A sharp crack. A squeal of frost breaking. In an instant, the pup slipped from her jaws and vanished into black water. She didn't hesitate. She lunged, claws scraping, body slamming onto thin ice hard enough to split flesh. A shard gashed her paw, staining the snow crimson. She howled, tearing at the jagged hole with her teeth until gums bled, her cries echoing through the valley, a mother's agony unleashed against the storm. The current pulled too fast. The pup surfaced once, golden eyes wide with terror, a desperate gasp, then disappeared again. She screamed. Not for her pack. Not for her mate. She screamed to the mountain, to the sky, to anything that might listen. And something did. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a man. It moved from the pines like a memory carved in muscle and shadow. A mountain lion. Heavy-shouldered, golden eyes glowing, a rival, an executioner by nature. She spun to face him, bloodied teeth bared, ready to die. But he didn't strike. He stood still, watching. Snow whirled between them, predator against predator, history humming like static in the air. Then, slowly he stepped forward. One massive paw extended, claws raking at the water. Nothing. Again. The ice groaned. His whiskers brushed the surface. And then, with a violent hook, he pulled. A sodden body flopped onto the snow. The wolf lunged, frantic, nudging, whimpering. For a breath, nothing stirred. Then twitch. A cough. A sputter. Water spilled from tiny jaws, followed by a weak cry. Alive. She froze, ears pinned back, chest heaving. Then her whine split the storm, raw relief cracking her open. The cougar stood above them, breath fogging, his eyes meeting hers. Not predator and prey, not enemies bound by instinct, but something else. Recognition. A pause in the endless rhythm of kill or be killed. Without a sound he turned, vanishing into the trees. If this moment struck you the way it struck me, take a second to hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in her place. Would you fight, or would you trust? Elena didn't sleep the night the alert pinged their inbox. The motion camera up in Hollow Creek had gone off twice in an hour. Once at twilight, once near midnight. Tom brewed coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in and said nothing while she pulled on her parka and clipped fresh batteries to her belt. The storm had blown east. Stars hung cold and knife-sharp over the ridge when they snow-showed out. Hollow Creek was a narrow cut in the mountain, a place where the wind tunneled and sculpted drifts into frozen waves. They reached the post, brushed frost from the steel box, and slid the card into the field tablet. The first clip was a blur of wind-driven snow, a mule deer nosing for lichens, a raven hopping into frame like a bored stagehand. The second made them both lean closer. The wolf came first, a gray ripple in the dark, moving with the stiff, careful gait of an animal that had learned pain. She paused at the creek, nose high, steam rolling from her muzzle. Then the pup, clumsy but determined, scrambled after and pressed into her chest, trying to disappear inside her fur. He blinked up as if asking permission to breathe. And then, the lion. He stepped out as if the forest shaped itself around him, shoulders rolling under his winter coat, tail low, eyes catching and holding the starlight. He didn't stare the wolf down. He didn't crouch. He just waited, as if the night belonged to all three of them and they had agreed on that long before humans arrived with lenses and laws. Elena sucked in a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "They're not crossing paths," she said softly. "They're traveling." Tom watched the time-stamp tick down, the three animals vanishing into the ripple of dark trees. He touched the scar on his forearm, white and ropey, a souvenir from a sow grizzly he'd surprised at a serviceberry bush 10 years earlier. If the wrong rumor blew through the wrong bar in town, men would come. The kind who collected moments like this in the same way they collected antlers. "We keep this quiet," he said. They didn't. Not long enough. By noon the next day, a ranch hand named Cole posted shaky phone footage of prints, big ones, small ones, stitched together across his pasture. By evening, a local blogger eager for traffic had cut an edit of Tom's old lecture clips about predator ranges, slapped them over B-roll of running wolves, and titled it Rockies Miracle, Wolf and Cougar Allies? The views climbed like a brush fire up dry grass. With them came opinions. Nature is healing man. Fake. Those tracks were laid with a cat on a leash. Both. You can't let this kind of behavior spread. Elena turned her phone face down on the briefing table and stared at the map. The southern pass narrowed into a kind of stone hourglass, one way out of the basin without climbing ice-choked walls. If the animals kept angling south, they'd have to thread it. She traced a route with a gloved finger. If we can meet them here, she circled a bend where the creek curled tight against a granite shoulder, we can move the watchers back. Close the old logging road. Keep it quiet long enough for them to clear. Tom nodded. And if we can't? Then we watched them get pushed into a corner. They left at first light with a pack radio, a thermos, and a quiet promise not to speak if their words would draw attention. The pine held last night's cold in its needles. Elk's sign braided the meadow edges. Overhead, a raven rolled once in the air and croaked as if laughing at their small human plans. By late morning they found the first trap. It was tucked in a drift under the trimmed edge of a spruce where the wind wouldn't fill it in. A rubber-jawed foothold with ground anchor, legal if set for coyotes on private land, a felony where it lay now. Tom knelt, jaw tight, and sprung it with a gloved hand. The jaws snapped shut with a flat, brutal finality. Elena crouched beside him. "Bait?" she asked. "Just scent," he said, pointing to a cotton wad tied to a hanger of twigs, coyote urine, skunk, beaver castor. The world as a lure. Guy knew what he was doing. Or watched 3 YouTube videos and thought he was Daniel Boone, Elena muttered. They flagged it for evidence and moved on. The second trap was smarter. A cable snare blended into a choke point where a drifting log had left a narrow corridor through the snow. Tom photographed it from 6 angles, cut it with a set of side cutters, coiled it into the game bag like a dead snake. He didn't swear. He didn't need to. By mid-afternoon the wind had shifted. With it came the sound, thin at first, then buzzing angry as a hornet. A drone. Tom scanned and found it, a black cross skirting the treetops with a GoPro belly and a floodlight bolted to its ribs. It tracked the line of the creek, paused, tilted, skittered forward. Elena lifted binoculars. Hobby model. Good range. No transponder. Which means no ID. Tom kept his eyes on the sky. Which means some jackass on a couch is steering a $1,000 toy toward a 1,000-year-old story. They took cover under the outspread boughs of a fir and listened to the buzz ebb and swell, a mechanical mosquito circling a heartbeat. When it drifted toward the pass, they moved again, faster now, breath pluming, snow creaking under the rawhide of their shoes. Near the bend, the forest opened into a shallow bowl speckled with old boulders. The creek, narrow and dark, cut the bowl's lip a foot at a time, sawing a path to the south. Pine sap scented the air. Somewhere a grouse popped its wings like a small drum. They crouched behind a glacial stone and waited. The wolf arrived first, as if she had always belonged to that kind of light, late-day blue, thin as glass. She tested the wind, then moved down the rib of snow toward the creek, stepping where the crust would hold. The pup bounced behind, fell into her track, scrambled up again. He was stronger. His ribs no longer stitched his sides tight. The lion's shape slid into view a moment later, not slinking, not owning, just there like a rock formation that had learned to breathe. The drone appeared on a whisper. It hung above the bowl, jittering slightly in the wind, lens eye glinting. It dropped a foot, then another, greed pulling it down like gravity. The wolf's ears flicked. The lion's head lifted and stayed up. Elena's hand closed on Tom's sleeve. "If it dives." "It won't," he said, but his voice wasn't steady. "These guys want footage, not blood." On the screen of the controller, 2 states away, some man's pupils dilated. The feed was crisp. The comments were hot. "Get closer. Go lower. Scare the wolf. See what the cat does." The floodlight clicked on and threw a swing of hard white through thin air. The lion flowed forward. Not a charge. A decision. He stepped to where the wolf stood and placed his body between her and the machine. He didn't snarl. He didn't strike. He simply existed exactly where he needed to be and looked up with an expression that read as old as winter. Enough. The drone hesitated, drifted, edged lower. Tom rose from behind the rock in one smooth motion and launched a fist-sized stone with the accuracy of an old farm kid who had spent summers throwing at tin cans on fence posts. The rock hit one of the props with a crack. Plastic shrapnel pinwheeled. The drone lurched, coughed, and cartwheeled into the snow with a hiss and a spark. Silence poured back into the bowl like water into a hole. The wolf didn't flee. The lion didn't chase. They stood for 3 long breaths, eyes tipped to the wind. Then the wolf touched her nose to the pup's head as if counting him into the shape of the world, and the 3 of them slid into the trees like a story choosing secrecy over applause. "You just made someone very angry," Elena said, her voice flat with fear and a little awe. Tom shouldered his pack. "Let him be mad at me," he said. "Not at them." They detoured wide and buried the drone in a drift. On the way out of the bowl, Elena found a set of boot prints cutting downslope across their trail, men moving fast, not bothering to keep quiet. A cigarette but still smoked near a spruce at the bowl's rim. The smell clung to the bark like a cheap jacket. 3, she said, measuring stride and depth. Maybe 4. 1 lighter, 1 heavy. The light one drags his right foot a hair. Old injury. Rifles? Tom asked. She pointed to a deep heel gouge where someone had dug in and pivoted. At least 2 with bipods. And they were watching the drone feed. They made the pass before full dark and set a small, smokeless fire behind a screen of wind-fallen trunks. Tom warmed his hands and stared into the red core while Elena scrolled through the day's frames on the tablet. Wolf, pup, lion, drone, the moment the stone broke the prop, the instant right after when the bowl looked exactly like a painting of peace. "Do you ever think," she said, not looking up, "that maybe we don't deserve this? That if we weren't here to witness it, it could just be?" Tom thought of the bear and the serviceberry bush, of the way it had felt to realize he wasn't a story to the bear, just a shape in her morning. He thought of the kids in town who had grown up on screens and still hiked out to the ridge every fall to watch the elk bugle because some things refused to live inside a phone. "We don't deserve anything," he said. "But sometimes we show up anyway. And sometimes that's the job." The wind freshened. It brought with it the faintest hint of fuel and hot plastic. Down valley, a generator coughed to life. Lights pricked the night, 3 then 5, headlamps punching holes in the dark. Voices carried thin elastic. Someone laughed too loud at a joke that wasn't funny. The watchers had set up camp. By dawn, a small city had bloomed at the edge of public land. A documentary crew with a white Sprinter van and a drone trailer. 2 YouTubers with fluorescent beanies and merch hoodies. A cluster of men who didn't wear logos, only layers of camo and the kind of boots you had to special order out of a catalog. Tripods splayed like metal insects. Coffee hissed in propane kettles. Over the hiss, a talking head rehearsed lines into the mirror of a dark phone. In a stunning development in the Rockies. Elena kept her hood up and her head down. Tom walked straight through the mess with his badge out. "You're a mile inside the closure line," he said. "You need to move your equipment back to the gravel pit." The producer in the down parka blinked, smiled, and said words so smooth they squeaked. "We're a public interest news organization. The world deserves to know." Tom pointed to the boundary map in the laminated sleeve on his clipboard. "You can know from there," he said. "You can know all day from there." A man in camo with a hunter orange hat pushed forward. He didn't smile. "And what if something dangerous comes through here?" he asked. "You going to protect folks? Or are you going to protect your pets?" Tom met his eyes. The man's pupils were pinpoints. His breath smelled like energy drinks and a night without sleep. He's not from here, Tom thought, and felt a slump in his chest that wasn't quite sadness. "You're trespassing," Tom said. "Pack it up." It took an hour to move the circus. In that hour, 2 more drones went up. The Sprinter's crew filmed 3 takes of someone walking with faux purpose through crunchy snow, and the camo men had a low-voice conference that included a map, 2 fingers stabbing at the southern pass, and a sentence Elena picked on the wind. If they funnel there, we'll have a clear shot. By noon the clouds thickened again. Weather crawled in from the west with a haloed sun at its center, a wolf's eye looking down through gauze. Tom radioed in the updated closure and signed a citation that would look good on paper and do nothing at all. Elena wiped her lens with a corner of her sleeve and scanned the treeline one more time. Nothing moved. The world held its breath. They hiked back to the bowl at last light. Snow had softened the edges of their tracks from yesterday. The hole where the drone had died wore a smooth lid, like even the mountain understood the utility of forgetting. The creek muttered under its glaze. A marten stitched neat commas along the bank and vanished under the roots of a spruce. For a long time they saw nothing but that ordinary quiet, the kind that arrives when no one is telling it to be interesting. Then the pup appeared, as ridiculous and alive as a punchline. He clambered up the side of a drift, slid, yipped, tried again. The wolf followed in a series of efficient, delicate steps, never once breaking the crust. The lion ghosted the bowl's rim and paused to look back at the notch of the pass, as if taking a measure of wind and distance and the shape of the days to come. Elena realized she was crying only when the tears froze lashes together and made the world sparkle like bad Christmas lights. Tom didn't say anything. He lifted the tablet and filmed the least spectacular part of the miracle. 3 animals simply moving through their winter toward whatever waited beyond the next shoulder of rock. He kept filming when the wind shifted and carried up the faintest sound of laughter from the gravel pit. He kept filming when a raven strafed the bowl and dropped a stolen French fry in the snow like a weird blessing. He kept filming when the wolf paused, head tilted, and then changed direction, not toward the pass where humans waited with microphones and meanings, but into a tighter fold of the ridge that would add hours to their route and save their lives. "Smart girl," Elena breathed. Smart girl." The lion followed her with the same unshowy acceptance he had shown the drone, the creek, the quivering edge of whatever had started the day he pulled a pup out of black water. He didn't make a plan. He didn't ask permission. He just went. Night found Tom and Elena pacing the ridge above the bowl, listening for the wrong kind of silence. They heard owls, good. A fox barked twice, good. A snowmobile far down valley, bad but moving away. When sleep came, it was in shards. When morning cracked, they were up to follow. They shadowed the trio for 2 days across terrain that asked for humility and gave no receipts. On a north-facing slope where the snow stayed dry as flour, they found where the lion had bedded facing uphill and the wolf had taken a shallow scoop inside the wind shadow. The pup had fallen asleep half on her rib cage like a child in the back seat of a car, mouth open, tongue barely out. Elena photographed everything and then stood for a long time doing nothing at all, just letting the image settle where it needed to. On the 3rd morning the weather turned strange. Sky white as bone, no horizon, the kind of light that flattens distance and makes a 3-foot drift look like a prairie. They moved blind for an hour until Tom smelled cigarette again and lifted a hand. Voices came thin through the wash. The camo men had circled ahead after all, aiming for the pinch point where rock and creek squeezed close as a clenched fist. Elena's heart went quiet. "They'll be in the slot by noon," she said. Tom checked his watch, then the gray smear where the sun ought to be. He slung the rifle off his shoulder, not to hunt, but to convince men with rifles that he knew what a trigger did. "Then we get there at 11, he said. They broke into a steady, punishing climb. The ridge fell away behind them like a dropped curtain. Somewhere up ahead, beyond the next fold and the next, a mother wolf taught her pup a map of wind, and a mountain lion, who should never have had a place in that lesson, kept walking at her shoulder like a punctuation mark no one had imagined, but that made the sentence right. The ridge steepened until the pines thinned to crumholes and rock, wind shaving the drifts into hard glass. Elena's calves burned. Tom's breath came in measured pulls, the way he'd learned on fire lines. Never all at once, never in panic. They moved in the pale tunnel of a whiteout, sky and slope the same color, until a black seam finally opened ahead, the slot. It wasn't dramatic from a distance. No cathedral arch. Just a crooked hallway carved by ice and time, walls of granite close enough to touch with both hands if you dared. The creek threaded it like wire, sound damped to a muffled murmur. On either side, shoulders of rock rose and caught the wind, which pushed snow into the middle like a conveyor. Anything that wanted south without climbing a day's worth of vertical would pass through here. Tom stopped at the mouth and held up a fist. Everyone he'd ever trained with would have recognized the signal. Hold, listen. Beneath the wind there was another sound. A tiny metallic chatter, the kind a hard object makes when a cold hand bumps it against harder stone. Then the squeal of a tripod foot twisting for purchase. Voices, low and clipped, the cadence of men who knew how to make short words look like control. Elena slid to her belly behind a drift and raised binoculars over the rim. At first she saw only the slot itself, poor visibility, static snow drifting sideways in sheets. Then shapes resolved. A blind cut into a snowbank on the right wall, a hole the size of a TV with a strip of camo net pulled across it. On the left, 3 men hunkered behind a Roman line of boulders, rifle barrels angled into the pinch like chess pieces. One of them flicked a glance down to a phone, signal here must bounce off the rock just enough, and nodded. Up above, on a ledge of stone maybe 20 feet off the deck, a fourth crouched with a spotting scope and a radio mic at his collar. They made a funnel, Elena breathed. They're going to drive them to the middle and take the shot when the wolf hesitates. Tom didn't answer for a long moment. His eyes were on the snow itself, on the way it humped and thinned where wind pressed it against the wall, on the gray slickness near the top where a slab had formed. They're going to do more than that, he said finally. They're going to knock something loose if they aren't careful. You think avalanche? Small one. A wind slap, maybe a cornice break. Enough to bury a pup, snap a leg. He keyed his radio, kept it on low power, and spoke in code the two of them had used since a backcountry rescue their first year. Lines dirty. There's hot. Pull the plug. Translation, we don't have the ground. Weather favors them. We need a new plan. Elena slid back and set the field tablet on her knees. Yesterday's map glowed up at them, GPS crumbs trailing their route like a quiet confession. She tapped the topographic layer. Between the slot and a notch to the west lay a parallel crease in the mountain, steeper at the start, but safer higher up where old rock slides had armored the slope with stable rubble. If she hugs the wall on the north side and cuts over the shoulder here, she traced it, she can bypass the choke. It'll add hours, but it keeps them out of the guns. And how do we convince her to make a mountaineer traverse? Tom said, but his tone was already shifting into problem-solving, not disbelief. We don't. Elena's eyes moved to the scuffed ledge above the slot where the spotter hunched. But we can convince them to move. How? Make them believe the animals are already past. Or make them afraid to stay. Tom weighed both in a breath. Afraid's faster. They split without ceremony. Tom angled upslope to the west through trees thin as fingers, aiming for the parallel crease. Elena low-crawled along the lee of the right-hand wall until she could see the men's faces. The one in the blind had a narrow head and pale lashes. His mouth worked on gum with insect dedication. The guy on the rocks kept wiping his scope with the same square of cloth as if polishing would give him control. The spotter on the ledge had a hunter orange hat tucked low and the stance of someone who'd earned it. Elbows in, feet good, no wasted motion. She filed that away, dangerous but not a fool. She unslung her pack, fished out a coil of bright flagging tape, and tied a length to a dead spruce branch. Then she waited for a lull, never more than 3 seconds in a wideout like this, and stood up just high enough to whip the tape over the slot and let it flutter down the other side like a blaze mark. Hey! The man on the rocks barked, snapping his head around. Movement. The blind belched a cloud of vapor as the gunner hissed, Where? The spotter lifted his scope and tracked snow like a cat tracks a moth one room over. A second tape sailed, then a third, staggered, vanishing into the gray the way an animal's tail tip can vanish when you want it most. Elena made sure the third landed in a snag on the far wall and flapped for a heartbeat like a flag on a storm ship. They turned as one organism, left, right, up, attention bleeding from the middle. The man on the ledge muttered into his collar mic. The blind man hissed, Hold, the way people hiss at dogs. The rifles tilted west. Elena slid back, belly cold, and started a count in her head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. She hit 7 then 8 and the slab coughed. It was gentle at first. A low, soft release like a sigh from a sleeper. The top 5 inches of wind-whipped powder detached where it had been plastered to the smooth face. Then a lip peeled and threw its weight forward. Snow went from white to gray, from flat to particulate, 100,000 tiny decisions agreeing to move at once. The spotter saw it first. He shouted something that could have been slide, or down, or a name. The blind man glanced up, always a mistake, then down too late. The slab kissed the wall above his hide, poured over in a sheet, and slapped into the drift like a hand closing over a candle. The gun mouth choked. The man with the narrow head vanished to his shoulders in beating white and started punching at snow like it was water. The rock team looked up, flattened, then stood, which made them taller targets for the heavy center of the slough. It shoved them to their knees and filled the spaces between their legs with cement that didn't intend to be liquid ever again. "Move!" the spotter snarled, and to his credit he didn't go down to help, which would have doubled the casualties. He slid off the ledge on his butt, dug in heels, and steered himself like a toboggan past the spill, then braced and hauled on the blind man's shoulders until the man coughed up a spray of curses and snow. Elena didn't cheer. She didn't step forward. She took the moment the way a fox takes a vole. Quick, efficient, gone. She scrambled up slope, cut left into the trees, and met Tom at the lip of the parallel crease, both of them breathless and gray with blown powder. "Nice avalanche," he said. "I didn't touch it. Nature likes you. Nature tolerated me once." They dropped into the crease and moved like water. Quiet, committed, taking the line the mountain gave. The wind eased here the way it does on the backside of a mood. Trees thickened, lanky subalpine fir giving way to spruce and then, in a hollower, to aspen climbing out of the creek's reach. A good sign, a promise of lower country if you could thread the needle. They found the trio's tracks again at midday. Not the men, the animals. The wolf's stride had opened. She was no longer guarding every placement like a fragile thing. The pup's prints slammed 2 for 1 into hers, then veered off to examine some outrage of smell and scrambled back when the world moved. The lion's pads cut a clean line at the wolf's shoulder, not crowding, not lagging, as if being near was a decision renewed each minute. Tom crouched and held his hand above one of the pads in midair, feeling heat not with skin but with that odd backcountry sense you get after enough days out. The sense that your body can read time as well as touch. 20 minutes, he said. Maybe less. Elena nodded, but her attention had snagged on something else. A tuft of gray caught in willow twigs at her eye level. She plucked it and rubbed it between fingers. Guard hair, wolf, but the skin flake at the base held a tiny black dot. She lifted it to the light and grimaced. Bugs already. He needs sun and a sandbar to roll on. Spring can't come soon enough. They worked higher, then cut back, mapping their shadow to an animal they couldn't see. At a notch where an old slide had carved a slash they finally did, just for a flicker. The wolf topped the notch in profile, a stylized thing against the bruised sky, and paused long enough for the pup to slam joyfully into her foreleg and eat snow. She nudged him up with her chest and they disappeared like breath off a mirror. They were almost to the shoulder when the machine found them again. Not the couch guy's toy, a bigger rig, heavier, built on a carbon fiber frame with a gimbal as steady as a surgeon's hand. It came in low, hugging folds, lights off, quiet as a gull coasting on an updraft. Elena didn't hear it until it was on them. Tom didn't see it until it cleared the edge of the notch and hung there, lens dead center, as if considering whether humans still qualified as a story in a day that had already selected better protagonists. Elena's hand went to the rock at her knee. She almost threw. Tom caught her wrist without looking away from the drone. Not this one, he said. We bring that down and its friends bring friends. What then? Make it bored. He cupped his hands and barked. Not quite a wolf note, not human either. A rough, ugly sound that carried out and down. Then he did it again in a different rhythm. Elena stared, then understood. He wasn't imitating, he was telegraphing. Not to the machine, to the animals. 3 short, 2 long. Not the slot. Not the slot. She found breath and added a noise of her own. A crow's harsh caw, then silence, then 2 more. It was nothing. It was nonsense. It was also sound from a direction with no scent attached and no shape the animals recognized. Sometimes that's enough to plant a doubt. The drone slid sideways, catching them in frame again, and rose. It backed off as if it had been told to widen for context, then pivoted toward the shoulder where the wolf had just been. It wanted the moment of the trio's silhouette against the ridge. It wanted an audience to recognize triumph. The lion ruined the shot. He stepped onto the shoulder in the same unimportant way he'd stepped in front of the floodlight. Not posing. Not warning. He simply occupied the exact place the camera needed to make meaning and refused to move. The drone read bodies as objects. The operator read animals as trophies. Neither understood obstruction as ethics. But the lens understood a blocked view. The feed on some phone somewhere turned into tawny hide and muscle and nothing beyond it. Tom started laughing, a raw, involuntary sound he damped immediately with the heel of his hand. Elena unclenched her rock and let it drop into the snow. The machine rose. It circled. It dipped, perhaps to climb under the line of the cougar's chest and get the wolf anyway. The lion adjusted, a half step, a small recalibration of presence. The camera got pelted with blown snow and a brief, infuriating study of hair. Down valley, a generator coughed again. Over the ridge, where the slot cut south, men were moving, angry now, and when men move angry, small mountains move with them. Enough, Tom said, not to the lion this time. We've bought the minutes we can. Time to burn the rest. How? Elena asked. By being the story they can catch. They didn't sprint. Sprints in this country end with broken bones and personal essays. They moved deliberately toward a line of scattered boulders that ran like vertebrae along the lower lip of the crease. Elena shrugged off her parka and knotted it to her pack frame. The purple fabric popped against the white like a bruise. Tom flipped his hood down and pulled his orange stocking cap tight. Then they stood where a camera would see two human shapes and waved. The drone took the bait with the cheerful stupidity of a magpie that's just seen foil. It dropped, surged toward them, then jerked back, uncertain at the last as its operator weighed angles and FAA suggestions and the taste of a fine for harassing wildlife. That hesitation was enough. Tom and Elena slid off the backside of the vertebrae line, moving now in the blind zone between small outcrops and side hill toward the west shoulder. When they looked back once, just once, the lion had vanished. The wolf's track angled into the tree's upslope instead of down the slot. The pup's prints overlapped hers like a child trying on a parent's boots. Good girl, Elena said again, and this time she let herself feel the hot edge of relief. They made the shoulder just as the weather decided to pick a side. The whiteout loosened. Sky bruised into a proper color. Through the open mouth of the parallel crease, the valley widened like a hand unclenching. Far below, the gravel pit city twinkled blue and orange, small and fussy as a toy set. And in the notch of the slot, three tiny figures stumbled and swore and dragged gear out of drifted snow while a fourth gestured furiously at a phone that had stopped agreeing with him. Elena's radio cracked. Static first, then dispatch, voice thin from bouncing off too many complicated rocks. Unit 7, we have a report of shots fired near Closure Gate B. Unknown if at game or in air. Tom thumbed the transmit. 7 copies. We're above the pass. Investigating. They moved downslope in a half-run, half-slide, using spruce as brakes. The nature of the sound changed as they approached, the way impact does. What had been abstract sharpened into the hard metal click and rack of rifles being made ready, then the crack of 2 shots. Not suppression. Not warning. Aiming at something. Elena's chest went cold. She saw it before Tom did, the flash of gray ahead, low and fast, then the whip of a tawny tail vanishing behind a rock. The wolf cut left. The lion took the right line higher as if to draw fire. A bullet snapped a stick a foot from Elena's knee. She dropped, rolled, and came up behind a stump with a mouth full of snow and the taste of pennies. Rourke. Vass. A voice bellowed down the gully. Get out of the channel. Hold your fire. Tom roared back, voice section boss big. You're in violation of a closure order and you just shot over federal officers. Then come write me up. That from the orange hat spotter, who traded scope for a rifle and his ledge for the floor where men bled. A shape moved to Elena's right, purple parka, camera harness, a YouTuber with more nerve than sense, sprinting toward the sound with a gimbal held out like a shield. Don't, she barked, and he froze the way a dog freezes when reminded of a command it knows and dislikes. He wavered, then crouched, lens still pointed like piety. Another shot cracked. Snow dust leapt from a rock face inches above where the pup's last tracks stitched a diagonal through the choke. The wolf wheeled like a gust had changed direction and planted herself between noise and smallness. She didn't growl. She didn't bare teeth. She stood the way a tree stands. "Don't," Elena whispered to everyone at once. The lion came then, not as a deus ex machina, not a comic book leap, just a line of muscle choosing a vector. He dropped from the right with a sound like a boulder coughed loose and hit hard in front of the man with the narrow head, the one who chewed gum like motive. The man staggered backward, tripped over his own gear, and fired into the air with a reflex born of fear and bad training. The bullet smacked a branch. The branch carved a neat arc into the drift and buried his rifle to the rail. He screamed, not hurt, not yet, but outraged by humiliation. "Stop!" Tom shouted and stepped out of cover with both hands high, palms like flags. "Weapons down. You fire again and you go to jail on half a dozen counts before you make it back to your truck." The orange hat man sighted, held, and did the one thing that still surprised Elena. He lowered his rifle. He wasn't stupid. He had lines he didn't intend to cross in front of witnesses with badges. He also had pride. His jaw worked. His eyes cut between lion, wolf, ranger's camera. The calculus changed in real time. "Back away," he said to his own men, quiet and lethal as a tripwire. "We're not winning a fight we can't narrate." They moved, ugly and graceless, muttering into their necks. One yanked his rifle out of the snow with both hands and a snarl. Another scooped a dropped mag with fingers that had gone pink from wet and cold. The blind man coughed again and spat gray. The lion didn't chase. The wolf didn't flinch. The pup reappeared from under her belly, shook, and sneezed in a way that would have been comedy if the world hadn't been razor wire. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then the wind shifted, and with it came a sound so ordinary it felt like salvation. Geese somewhere high above, honking like badly tuned horns as they traced AV toward something that promised thaw. Elena let out breath. Her hands shook as if her body had been saving the tremor for when it wouldn't kill her. Tom took one step back, then another, never turning his back on the men. A new sound cut across all the others. The bigger drone again, ripping up the valley like a wasp with an old grudge. It came low, gimbal down, smart now to human drama. The operator, wherever he perched with his coffee and his need, had realized this was the shot the algorithm loved. Law, blood, tooth, myth. The drone dipped for the lion's face. The lion didn't oblige. He turned away and walked into the trees. The wolf followed. The pup wrapped his track into hers like thread. The camera got nothing but a study of snow. Tom stared up at the machine and, because he is, despite everything, a man of this century as well as the last, he gave it what it had earned. He lifted one gloved hand and extended one gloved finger. Elena almost smiled. Almost. Then her radio crackled. More voices, more movement at the closure gate, a disgruntled producer trying to serve a paper letter that said cease and desist in 7 fonts, because the law in this country could always be printed louder when it failed to speak. "We don't have another day like this," she said. "No," Tom agreed. He looked at the line of trees where the animals had gone. But they might. They fell back along the ridge, putting rock and chance between themselves and men who had decided a miracle belonged in their hands. Below, the gravel pit city glowed in the early dark, each lantern a little claim staked on a story. Above, the mountain made no such claims. In the crease where only wind went, 3 animals traveled south without permission. The storm eased by midnight, but the forest did not sleep. The northern Rockies have their own pulse, breathing in the hiss of snow sliding off branches, exhaling in the distant crack of shifting ice. Tom and Elena trudged in silence, their headlamps casting narrow cones of light on the unbroken trail. Behind them, the valley lay scarred with human footprints and bloodless memories of rifles raised. Ahead stretched nothing but uncertainty. Tom stopped to adjust the strap of his pack, his breath fogging the cold. She saved her pup again. And the cougar, he didn't just defend her. He defended them both. His voice was low, nearly swallowed by the wind. "That is an instinct," That's choice. Elena tightened her gloves, her jaw set. Choice maybe. Or desperation. But either way, Tom, we're the only ones who know what's happening out here. And if hunters find them first, that choice won't matter. They pressed on. The wolf padded steadily, her ribs filling out as winter thinned into a reluctant spring. Each day her pup grew stronger, his awkward steps sharpening into bounding leaps, his voice into sharp yips that echoed through the timber. But shadowing them, always a few lengths behind, padded the cougar. He did not herd, did not threaten. He watched, guarded. And sometimes, when night pressed heavy and the cold bit deep, he drew close enough that the she-wolf could feel his breath mingling with her own. At first, she bristled at his nearness. Old laws carved in bone warned her, cougar meant death. But days became weeks and he did not strike. Instead, she caught him staring at the pup. Not with hunger, but with something harder to name. The pup would tumble in snow, squealing, and the cougar's ear would twitch, his golden eyes narrowing with a strange kind of patience. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, the pup stumbled into a drift too high to climb out. His tiny claws scrabbled, his whimpers sharp. The wolf lunged forward, too late. A blur of tawny muscle flashed. The cougar's paw hooked behind the pup, pulling him free, setting him down gently at his mother's feet. The she-wolf froze, her heart thundering. For a breath, predator and rival stood close enough for blood to spill. But no strike came. Only stillness. And in that stillness, something shifted. 2 valleys over, rumors burned hotter. Hunters spoke of a ghost pair, prince of wolf and cougar intertwined, kills left untouched, prey set free. Ranchers grumbled about cattle spooked but never slain, as if predators had passed through like shadows. Local radio carried whispered calls, a miracle, unnatural, dangerous. To scientists in Denver, it was data. To the hunters, it was sport. To Tom and Elena, it was a race. They tracked the pair south. Each day, the signs grew fresher, prints stamped deep into thawing mud, tufts of fur snagged on pine bark, the faint musk of wolf and cat carried on the thawing air. At night, they camped beneath towering spruces, listening to the ghostly chorus of coyotes and the distant thunder of ice breaking on ridges. Elena scribbled notes by firelight, her breath puffing white. 2 predators. No kill. Shared territory. Behavior contradicts every field study I've ever read. Tom watched the flames, his hand resting on the rifle slung beside him. Maybe it isn't about biology anymore. Maybe it's about survival. Same as us. The wild tested them both. One dawn, a grizzly stirred from hibernation, half-starved, stumbling into the wolf and her pup near a ravine. The cougar appeared first, his growl reverberating through stone, his body interposed like a wall of muscle and fury. The wolf snarled at his flank, hackles raised. The bear swiped, a paw heavy enough to shatter bone, but the pair moved as if bound by unseen rhythm, one lunging low, the other high. Snow erupted in sprays of white. For endless moments, chaos reigned. The pup whimpered, tucked into brush, eyes wide as orbs. He saw his mother slash at the bear's leg, saw the cougar rake claws across the beast's muzzle. Roars shook the valley until finally the bear lumbered back, retreating into shadow, blood marking his retreat. The wolf panted, chest heaving. The cougar's side bled from a deep gash. For the first time she stepped close, not to fight, not to flee, but to stand. Her muzzle brushed his shoulder briefly, a wordless acknowledgement. Then she licked her pup's ears and led him away. That night, under fractured moonlight, the cougar limped at their side. And though neither predator slept easily, the silence between them was no longer filled with fear. Hunters were not far behind. From ridge to ridge, their drones buzzed like hornets. In town bars, they bragged of the payday, when they'd bagged the miracle wolf and cougar together. Proof of man's dominance over myth. But not everyone wanted blood. At a ranger station, Tom and Elena fought bureaucracy like a storm. If they're killed, the footage dies with them, Elena argued, voice raw. This is behavior we've never documented. It could rewrite predator dynamics, reshape how we see coexistence itself. Her superior only sighed. Or it could rewrite tourism ads. Either way, you can't stop hunters on public land. But Tom clenched his fists. Then we'll find another way. Spring bled into summer. Flowers broke through snowmelt. Elk herds grazed in high meadows, watched from two sets of eyes, one golden, one amber. The wolf's pup, now lanky and restless, chased shadows across slopes. Sometimes the cougar would pace nearby, tail flicking as though measuring the young one's strength. One twilight, the pup bounded too close to a cliff edge. His paws slipped. The wolf barked, panic flooding her chest. But before she could reach him, the cougar leapt, body arching like lightning. His claws hooked stone, his jaws snapping at the pup's scruff, hauling him back from the abyss. The wolf stared, her body trembling. For the second time, her son's life had hung in silence, and for the second time, it was the cougar who gave it back. Her eyes softened. Not trust, not yet, but something that lived close. If this moment struck you the way it struck me, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what you would have done in her place. Would you fight, or would you trust? The legend grew louder than the truth. Bloggers uploaded blurry stills of paw prints. Hunters uploaded staged videos. Hashtags turned into wildfire. Hashtag wolf and cougar, hashtag miracle predators. And through it all, in the shadow of the peaks, the she-wolf, her pup, and the cougar kept moving south, each step an act of defiance against the laws the world thought it knew. But the wild has no patience for miracles. And the closer they drew to human borders, the more fragile their fragile alliance became. Because the greatest predator they would face was still waiting. And it walked on two legs. By noon the temperature did something that made every old-timer in the county swear at the sky. It rose. Not a gentle thaw, an ugly one. Rain rode in on a south wind and fell onto snowpack like hot breath on glass. The drifts didn't melt so much as collapse, slumping in sheets that slid off logs with a soft, wet thud. Ice loosened its grip on granite. Somewhere up valley a cornice let go with a sound like a train turning over in its sleep. Tom and Elena ditched their snowshoes and punched through rotten crust to the ankles. Water braided down the skin of the mountain, seeking the creek, swelling it from a cautious winter trickle to a black-green rush that shouldered aside its own banks. The wolf's track turned unreadable in the slop. The pup's sign vanished entirely. Only the lion's pads kept their shape in the wet, oddly neat coins impressed in a world that had forgotten angles. "This is the worst kind of mercy," Tom said, flicking water off his cap. "Rain on snow. Gives you visibility, takes away footing." Elena's eyes were on the creek. "It also turns the slot into a chute. If they try it now." "They won't," Tom said with a confidence he didn't feel. "She's smarter than we are." They cut west along a bench Tom remembered from a fire scout year, a narrow, half-forgotten terrace where an old stream had once run before the mountain corrected the map. In places, the bench pinched to single file above a drop where ice and air traded ownership every hour. In others, it widened into scruffy islands of willow and alder. It would go, if you were careful. It would carry a mother and pup above trouble, if luck cooperated. Half a mile in, they found the wolf again. Not her body, her insistence. She had pinned the pup against her ribs in an alder thicket while the creek below threw its shoulders. The lion stood on the bench's outer edge, tail down, facing the water as if to measure its mood. When the wolf moved, he moved, not leading, not hurting, just marking the outside of the path the way a guardrail marks a road. "Okay," Elena breathed, and only then realized she'd said it aloud, as if animals accepted human permission. The bench made its own weather. Freezing rain ticked on branches and sheeted on Tom's jacket, turned the alder catkins into strings of glass. Every so often, a pine let go of an ice load in a wet gasp and shivered itself clean. The creek below punched at its banks, pulled at shelves of shore ice until they cracked and spun and rode along like broken teeth. By late afternoon, the circus down in the gravel pit had scented opportunity. The warm front had coaxed them out of their tents and into motion. A side-by-side buggy ground up the service track as far as the first washout and began offloading men like ants from a split log. 2 thermal scopes came out, sleek little miracles that turned living bodies into pearls on a black cloth. "IR," Elena said, ticking her tongue against her teeth. "They'll see them in seconds. Only if there's a line of sight." Tom scanned the bench. Then his mouth pulled sideways in a shape Elena had learned to trust. Not a smile, an idea. He yanked open his pack and came up with a Ziploc stuffed with hand warmers. "From the winter caches," he said. "You still carry safety pins?" She had 3 pinned inside her parka hem, guide's habit. Tom ripped open the packets with his teeth, shook them alive, and Elena stitched them along the underside of a rain-dark log, then tucked a mylar emergency blanket around the far end like a shawl. Within a minute, the log glowed faintly on Elena's phone camera, a soft, convincing smear of heat. She added 2 more warmers to a wad of damp moss and slid it under a low overhang. "Thermal decoys," she said. "They'll buy us 5, maybe 10 minutes before the rain wicks the heat out." 5 minutes is a lifetime in a funnel, Tom said. It worked long enough to matter. Downslope, the camo men pointed and turned like meerkats. One emphasized the wrong heat with his whole body, and 2 more moved toward it the way current moves toward a low point. The drone pivoted to oblige them. For a small, precious span, no one watched the line of alder where a gray shadow put her paws exactly where they would hold. Then luck broke. Rain worked into the bench's seam and a square yard of duff and root mat sighed and sloughed. The pup skidded with it, scrabbling, nails squealing on rock. The wolf spun at once, but the outside edge had gone soft. She skated on her own momentum and caught herself with a desperate, wrenching lunge, back half over space, front claws in mud, muscles shaking. The pup squealed. Water roared below. The lion got there first. He didn't leap, he dropped, a controlled fall of a body that knew what gravity did and how to cheat it. He planted on the outer lip, front half in air, and made himself into a shelf. His shoulder hit the pup's ribs and held. The pup clambered, scrabbling, climbed the tawny ladder with all 4 feet and a sort of frantic gratitude. For one stretched, breathless second, wolf and cat shared a weight, her forepaws and his with the pup between like a word they both understood. Then the wolf heaved, brought all 3 of them back to the bench's mean mercy, and shoved the pup under her chest with an efficiency that said, "Move now, marvel later." Tom's fingers hurt, and only then did he realize he'd curled both hands into fists so tight his nails bit his palms through gloves. Elena's lips were white. The rain softened again, then hardened, a cycle that made time feel like something an eel might shed. They pushed on, the bench bending toward a shoulder of rock where an old slide had armored the slope in refrigerator-sized blocks. In the jumbled spaces between the blocks, meltwater sang. "Good cover," Tom said. "Bad footing." The first human yodel reached them then, high, excited, the sound boys make it fences. It echoed off wet stone and came again, closer. The orange hat spotter led, his men at his back, one of the YouTubers in tow with a gimbal held out like communion. They had found a game trail that braided up from the washout and intersected the bench at the worst possible place. The block pile where a wrong step meant a slide into the creek's chew. Tom put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, not for the animals, for the men. He stepped onto a boulder where they could see the badge on his chest even if they chose not to see the rest of him. "Back off the flow," he shouted. "You're above undermined banks." "Get out of the shot," the YouTuber yelled, and Elena thought, that's the decade in 5 words. The gum chewer, pale lashes, narrow head, chose pride over friction and jumped to the next block. His boot heel hit lichen, his toe found air, and gravity did what it always does to men who think they negotiate with it. He dropped in a graceless, hard-bone tangle and landed shin-first into AV between stones. Something inside his leg made a sound like a pencil snapping. He screamed then, a noise that turned his friends' faces toward him and away from the wolf and the lion and the small wonder they'd come to turn into content. Tom was already moving. He crossed 2 blocks, 3, and slid knee-first into the V, wedging his thighs as a brake. "Don't pull," he snapped at the man with the orange hat, who had his hands already on the narrow head's armpits. "He's trapped. You'll shear the tib." Elena arrived with a tourniquet she didn't need yet and a trauma blanket she did. She jammed the rolled mylar under the kid's shoulders and breathed between words. Hey, look at me. What's your name?" "See, Cody," he managed, lips the color of the rain. "Okay, Cody," she said, voice going calm in a way it only ever did when blood was out where it shouldn't be. "You're going to hate this a little. Then you're going to like it a lot." She hooked fingers under his knee where the V pinched and said, "On 3, Tom," which meant not on 3, which meant now. Tom pried, Elena levered, and the leg came free with a wet pop and a gush of words from Cody that would have made his mother cry. The orange hat stared at them both with an expression Elena had not expected to see on his face, confusion shading toward respect. "You going to arrest us?" he asked, not moving his boots from the place she had specifically told him not to stand. "Not today," Tom said, binding Cody's leg with a Sam splint and his own belt. "Today I'm going to ask you to be useful. Get above flood line. Keep your men there. If you go down, you die. If you stay up, you live to apologize to me later." Something like a smile ghosted the edges of the man's mouth and was gone. He nodded once and managed, "Copy," like a firefighter. The YouTuber, resisting every obvious joke the universe had set on the table, kept filming, but his lens shook now. Rain ticked harder, then slackened. The river threw a full-sized log like a child throws a tantrum. In the corner of Elena's eye, a gray flank and a tawny tail slipped through the ragged alder screen. Gone again. Choosing a world where men were not. Tom keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is 7. One male with lower leg trauma at Bench Creek Slide. Request SAR and a helicopter if you can thread it. Weather's borderline." 7, copy, dispatch said, voice small and far away and professional enough to hold him up like a spine. "Launching SAR from Pine Ridge. Hello, on standby for window." The helicopter's window never opened. The storm's throat cleared and closed again with the stubbornness of a mule. SAR came on snow machines until the snow turned to slush, then on foot, then in that awkward hybrid of 4 men and a litter that looks like a parade for the hurt. Tom and Elena seated the patient and the authority with zero ceremony. On a bad mountain day, there's no room for rank. And in that slackening of attention, the river took its moment. Ice shelves that had hung on like promises gave all at once. A new channel opened and ran along the foot of the bench, chewing at its toes. Elena felt the tremor under her boots before she understood what it meant. "We have to move the animals now," she said. Tom didn't ask how. He said, "You take the upwind, I'll sweep the low. Scent wall." They weren't going to bait or drive. Both illegal, both wrong. They were going to do the simplest backcountry thing. Be louder upwind than down, so a wary mother chose a way. Elena scrambled up slope until her lungs burned and began moving level, breaking branches deliberately, speaking not quite words in a tone any animal would read as human. Tom slid along the outer lip of the bench and put his body between collapse and alder, not touching, not crowding, just present, a slow, steady metronome of two-legged scent. It worked like a thumb on a scale. The wolf checked the wind, angled a degree left, then 2, then committed to the narrow line where the bench ran into an old slide fan armored with rock that would not move again for a century. The lion took the bad side, the place where a misstep meant a learning you didn't come back from, and made it look like inevitability. They reached the fan and stopped like animals do, abruptly, perfectly, because stop was the right thing and not because someone told them to. The rain slackened to needles. Steam lifted in tiny breaths from the stone. The pup hopped up on a warm, flat slab and lay down with his chin between his paws like a child put there by a tired parent. Elena wanted to cry with the relief of it. Instead, she looked down valley. The Orange Hat's crew had hauled Cody to the rib above flood line and lashed him into a bivvy. The YouTuber had turned his camera on himself and was whispering the script of a man who had wanted a kill and had gotten a rescue and did not yet know what to do with it. SAR cut switchbacks into mud with the quiet profanity of professionals. Above all of them, the gravel pit city glowed in late-day gray. The Sprinter crew had pivoted their angle. Now they had a story about rugged mountain rescues and the indomitable human spirit, which was easier to narrate than the ethics of not filming a miracle to death. "Old burn scars ahead," Tom said, following the line of the rock fan with his eyes. Beyond it, the mountain offered something like kindness. A bowl of aspen and lodgepole in its teenage years, thick enough to hide in, open enough to move. No official trail, no easy line for machines. Rockfall had closed the only road 5 winters back, and the county had never found the money to reopen it. If they make the bowl, they can stay there until snow returns. And after? Elena asked. And after the world will have chosen a new outrage, Tom said. With luck, not them. They moved again, not because there was something to do, but because standing still made them a kind of stake in the ground they did not want to be. The bench turned from alder to scruffy fir, from fir to the pale bones of dead snags where a lightning strike had hopped crown to crown 15 years back. Underfoot, the duff was springy with new growth. The rain eased at last to a whisper and then to a memory. They found a place where a bear had torn open a log for carpenter ants and the pup had put his head in the hole up to his shoulders. Wolf hair stitched the rim. Cougar hair lay farther off, caught on a bent twig. A single tawny strand that slid across Elena's palm like a line underlined. "Take it?" Tom asked. Elena thought of labs and studies and the temptation to turn every wonder into a finding. She let the hair lift on a breath of evening air and drift. "Not today," she said. Dusk came quick in the burn bowl the way it does in young forest. The sky went lavender then iron. Far to the west, lightning muttered a threat it didn't intend to keep. Across the bowl a long wavering howl rose, a coyote choir tuning to the key of night. The wolf didn't answer. She bedded behind a screen of blown-down trunks, nose to wind, pup wrapped tight against her belly. The lion took a low shelf of stone just above, where he could watch the approach from two angles and wake on gravel instead of mud. He slept with his ears up, the way things sleep when life has required it. From the ridge lip above them, two human bodies watched a while longer, not to collect, not to prove, but to memorize. Tom wrote the shape of the bowl on the back of his eyelids and added a note about the western exit. Narrow, rocky, snow-holding late. Elena breathed and measured and let the last of the adrenaline leave. Then, almost simultaneously, they both rose, turned their backs, and walked away while silence still covered their retreat. Behind them, the mountain settled. Water backed into its banks. The last of the day's wind worried a strip of dead bark, found nothing to lift, and let it alone. Below, at the gravel pit, generators sputtered to a stop, one by one. A few headlamps drifted like will-o'-the-wisps and winked out. Somewhere, near the closure gate, a producer checked footage and tried out the last line of a voiceover 3 different ways, then deleted it and typed only, "Sometimes the wild does not want your ending." The following days blurred into a rhythm of snow and silence. The she-wolf and her growing pup pressed forward through valleys carved by glaciers, across ridges where the wind shrieked like a living thing. Each dawn brought frost stiffening their fur, each night brought hunger gnawing deeper into their ribs. Yet wherever they went, the cougar's shadow followed. Sometimes distant, sometimes so close she could hear his breath steaming in the air. At first, Tom and Elena believed they were tracking simple survival. But the prince told a different story. Again and again they found evidence not of rivalry but of restraint. Elk herds grazed unmolested. Carcasses half-eaten by scavengers bore marks that suggested the predators had moved on before finishing their kill. It wasn't just about hunger anymore. It was something else, something neither ranger could easily name. By the time they reached the lower valleys, rumors had grown into obsession. Social feeds filled with theories. Was it climate change driving predators to cooperate? Was it desperation? Or was it, as some insisted, a miracle? Hashtags surged. Videos comparing ancient myths of wolf-lion alliances went viral. Scientists gave interviews on cable news, shrugging at questions they had no way to answer. Hunters saw opportunity, activists saw hope. But on the ground, the truth was harder. One dusk, when the rangers reached a canyon split by frozen waterfalls, they heard voices again, different this time, accented, hushed. Not trophy hunters. Poachers. Men who trafficked in pelts and fangs. Tom signaled for silence. Elena crouched behind a boulder, scanning the canyon floor. A lantern flickered below. 3 men knelt around a snare, steel jaws smeared with bait. Elena's gut twisted. "They're setting for her," she whispered. Tom nodded grimly. They waited until the poachers moved on, then crept down the slope. The trap gleamed wicked in the half-light. Tom disarmed it with steady hands, anger tightening his jaw. "They're not going to catch her like this," he muttered. But a sound froze them both, a thin, wavering whimper echoing through the canyon. The pup. He had strayed too far. Snow dusted his muzzle as he pawed at frozen brush. And just beyond him, crouched low against the rock, the cougar. His golden eyes burned like embers. He looked not at the pup, but past him, toward the movement in the shadows where the poachers lurked, rifles cradled. Elena's heart stopped. A shot cracked the silence. The cougar exploded forward, muscles surging, snow scattering. The pup yelped and bolted, scampering toward his mother who came charging from the opposite ridge, her howl splitting the night. Bullets spat sparks against stone. One grazed the cougar's flank, a searing line of blood against pale fur. He didn't slow. He slammed into the nearest man, the force toppling rifle and body alike. The wolf joined in, snapping jaws, her fury a storm unleashed. The canyon filled with chaos, shouts, growls, ricochets. Tom and Elena burst from hiding, screaming, "Stop!" But the fight was already thunder. The pup crouched beneath an overhang, trembling, while his mother tore into boots and cloth, forcing the men back. The cougar's roar drowned everything, echoing like thunderclaps across the cliffs. One poacher dropped his weapon and fled. Another staggered, bleeding, dragging his companion. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. Snow drifted in slow spirals. The wolf stood panting, muzzle stained red, eyes wild. The cougar limped, flank torn, breath heavy. Yet neither turned on the other. Instead, they stood side by side, guardians not only of themselves but of something larger. Elena swallowed hard, hands trembling. "They're not just surviving," she whispered. "They're protecting each other." Tom could only nod, eyes wide. The pup trotted out, pressing against his mother's leg, tail low but wagging faintly. She bent to nuzzle him, her chest still heaving. Above, the storm cleared, moonlight spilling silver across snow and scar. It felt like the mountain itself bore witness. If you followed this far, you can feel the weight of it, the fight, the survival, the impossible alliance. Tap that like button if your heart's pounding like mine, and tell me in the comments, would you risk everything to protect the wild, even against your own kind? But danger hadn't ended. The poachers had escaped, wounded, yes, but alive enough to spread word. And word had value. Already, black market whispers promised fortunes for proof of a wolf and cougar traveling together. The rangers knew it wouldn't be long before more came. With drones. With rifles. With contracts written in blood money. So they moved faster, following the predators through valleys and ridges, praying they could reach them before the rest of the world did. The chase south became a race against time. Tom and Elena barely slept. Their boots tore through drifts, their breath hung ragged in the alpine air. Each dawn brought fresh predator tracks. Wolf paws pressed close beside heavy feline prints, always moving forward, always toward the unknown. But so did the hunters. Snowmobiles whined in the valleys. Drones hummed overhead like angry hornets. Each time, Tom and Elena smashed what equipment they could, dragging branches across trails, scattering snow to erase tracks. It bought hours, never days. By the third week, the she-wolf's pup no longer stumbled. His legs grew stronger, his coat thicker, his eyes bright with the unbroken fire of survival. Sometimes Tom caught sight of him through binoculars, bounding ahead before doubling back to press against his mother's side. And behind them always the cougar, a sentinel carved from shadow and resilience. Elena whispered one night by the fire, "They're teaching him something more than survival. They're teaching him trust." Tom only stared at the flames, haunted. Or they're teaching him how fragile it all is. The final confrontation came in a narrow pass of black rock and silver snow. A choke point where the ridges funneled everything into one frozen corridor. Tom and Elena arrived just as the predators did, and just as the hunters closed in from the other side. Floodlights cut through the dusk. Voices barked orders. Rifles clicked. The she-wolf stiffened, her pup pressing into her chest. The cougar lowered his head, tail lashing. Tom stepped forward, arms raised. "Stop. You don't understand." A rifle cracked. The bullet missed, sparking stone. The wolf snarled, but before she could lunge, the cougar stepped in front of her, his body a shield. Chaos erupted. Hunters advanced. Predators charged. Snow exploded beneath paws and boots. The pup darted for cover. Tom and Elena screamed, their voices swallowed in thunder. The cougar slammed into the lead hunter, jaws crushing the rifle stock in splinters. The wolf streaked low, snapping at legs, scattering men in panic. Floodlights toppled, beams sweeping wildly across the cliffs. But there were too many. A second shot rang out. The cougar staggered, blood staining snow. He roared, not in pain but in defiance, and lunged again. The wolf howled beside him, the sound so raw it rattled stone. For a moment, just a heartbeat, they stood together in the lights, side by side, blood and fury and something greater. Not enemies, not rivals, symbols. The hunters faltered. Their courage cracked. Against that sight, guns suddenly felt small. And then silence. The wolf's howl carried down the valley, rising like a prayer. The cougar answered with a roar that shook the mountain's bones. And as the echoes rolled, the predators turned, not to attack but to leave. They bounded into the trees, shadows swallowed by snow, the pup trailing safe at his mother's side. When it ended, the hunters fled. Not one dared pursue. Tom and Elena stood alone in the wreckage of lights and rifles, their breath ragged, their hearts broken open by what they had seen. Elena's voice cracked. "No one will ever believe this." Tom's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make them." Days later they returned with the motion-triggered cameras. What the lenses caught became legend. A she-wolf, scarred but unbroken. A cougar wounded yet still walking. And between them, a pup, alive, strong, his tiny howl answering theirs beneath the pale winter moon. The footage leaked and the world erupted. Some called it fake. Some called it miracle. Some said it was proof of a new age in the wild. But for those who knew, for those who had stood in that frozen pass and felt the mountain shake, it was truth. And truth once seen cannot be unseen. This story reminds us that nature still carries mysteries too big for us to cage, too wild for us to own. 2 killers, 1 miracle. A bond no one believed, until it stood in the snow before us. If you felt this story, share it with someone who needs to remember the wild is still alive. Subscribe for more survival tales, leave your thoughts below, and tell me, do you believe? The pass filled with silence again. Snow drifted like ashes across broken ground. Somewhere beyond the ridges, a wolf howled. A cougar answered, and the sound carried into legend. 2 predators, 1 miracle. A story the world almost lost.
Bye-bye!